guys, welcome back to the second episode of the series. So today we're going to try to get a little bit ahead of this API that we're building. Basically, the previous episode we set up all the environments, we connected the MongoDB, we create the first user module and controller, and now we're going to carry on developing our API, right? So if you did miss the previous episode, I strongly suggest you to come back and watch it. Otherwise, a lot of these things won't make sense to you, and the main part really is for you to keep in mind that you need to set up the MongoDB, the connection with the database, if you want to follow along with this tutorial, right? So there is a link to my GitHub. However, in that link you won't find the configuration file that connects on the MongoDB, and that's requirement. So you need to come back and watch the first video if you want to create your account and set up the MongoDB, right? So that's being said, let's carry on. Right now there's a few things that I would like to show you. The first thing before we start, I would like to mention, if you hear a little bit of noises, this is Frank. Frank is my dog, he's a French bulldog. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably can see him. So I'm on my bedroom right now, finding time to record a little bit more of these videos, and Frank is here, is sleeping and is snoring quite a lot, so sorry for that. Okay, so let's carry on, guys. First things first. The user controller and was renamed. So as the previous video, I left behind a few things showing you to rename this to user controller. If you haven't yet, that's easy. You just need to rename this file. If you press F2 or just click with your right click here, you'll be able to rename that. After you rename this, you need to update in these three parts of your code, otherwise it won't work. The first thing that I want to do as a carry on with this development is basically move all these endpoints to the routes file, right? So let's create this routes file. If you click in the source and click in create a new file, I want to create a routes.js. This will be a route. And basically now what we will need to define express here again. So let's require it express, and then we're going to define a route, and this route will be basically the express.router. So basically what the express.router is, this is a middleware that allows us to import the routes from a different file and inject into the express, right? So now let's come back here to the server. Basically we're going to be moving this here. So now if you paste that here, was just an example, we won't need that. However, the user register, we are also going to do some changes here, right? Now will become instead of app will be routes. Will be routes, and let's export the route. Module.export equals routes. And basically what we're doing, we're using the routes to add those paths, and we're going to export it here, right? So after we exported, we can come back to the server. The controller we also need to move here, because remember this file is exactly what needs the controller. So we won't have a bunch of controllers and things without organization here. The next thing that we need to do before the app.listen, we need to do now the follow thing. Let's import now our routes from the routes. So we want to import our routes. Basically what we want to do now, let's add this. So we're going to do app.use and pass the routes there, right? So this is the same thing that we had before, but instead to have all the routes here, now Express will be looking at the middleware that we defined that basically will be here, right? So all the routes will work in the same way. So we had a hello world example and a get user by ID. So now if you basically send a request to the URL, we need to start the server. Just show you that everything is still working the same thing, right? So basically here, what I like to do is instead to send this response, is send a JSON response with the status 200, right? This is just means your server is up and speed and is running, and that's basically what it is. So now you get a nice and JSON response, and just like a little bit more professional. Coming back to these routes, I also would like to do some changes here. I would like to add the user.register, and we're going to keep this pattern because the URL is basically telling us, imagine you can understand consuming this API that yes, you want to register a user, right? Or you want to get a user by ID. So that's how we're going to do. And basically the next route that we're going to define will be a route.get. Remember that the post method creates get requires it back, so we want to ask for the server, give me the user, have the ID, so please find this user. So that's why we're using a get method instead. So here we're going to pass the user, and here this is the part that is interesting. So we're going to send a param request that will have a user ID, right? So then basically this method doesn't exist yet, so we're going to pass a user controller dot get user by ID. This doesn't exist yet, so let's go create this, right? So if you come back to the controller, now basically what we can do, we can define a new method, right? This is the store. Also we'll rename this, I guess. Let's start rename this first. I think store, it wasn't the best name that we could add, so we can say this could be a method create instead, right? I think create a user. Yeah, and then we're going to add back here create user instead. Let me see why this is not happy. Yeah, that should be fine now. Let me close that. Come back to the controller. Okay, so that now that we named here, let's just make sure that this is actually there, and now we need to create this method, right? So will be a very similar method, but it also will be an async method. So basically what we want to do here, I think we can even looking here, you pretty much could have an idea of what we want to do. So we're going to do a try and catch it again, and basically before that we want to get const user ID will be a rec.params, and basically the difference that previously create the user, we are sending a JSON body message, and now we're going to retrieve that from the params, right? So we need to pass the ID, and then with the ID what we can do is say const user equals user module that we have here, and from this user module we want a method that is find by ID. And basically what this does, this is we'll look inside the Mongo database for the user ID, and if we find it, we're going to return, right? So two things that we need to do here. The user ID needed to be the structure, because rec.params will return an object for us, and here we need to await, because this is a asynchronous code, right? And then basically we can return, and here we need to take request and response again. And then when we return in here, we can have the response dot send and send the user back like JSON. Yeah, so basically let's copy this, and then if we have an error, what we want to do is return status 400 to the client, and basically we're going to send something similar saying user ID not found, does not exist. Do you want to register instead, right? And then in the front end, we're going to be able to hand this situation, even rewrote the client to the register route, right? So this is basically what we're going to do. So now let's test this new endpoint. So now that we have this done, basically what we want to do is come back to Insomnia, make sure that the service is still working. Yeah, now we have the create user here, and we're going to create a new method. This new request method will be called get user by ID. You can call other name if you want to. I like to organize my requests in that order. So be URL, and now it will be user, and that's the nice part. If I pass here any number as an ID, so this is definitely does not exist inside the database. So basically it's returning user ID does not exist. Do you want to register instead? Basically this scenario that we're catching here, which is very interesting. But for this first scenario, what we can do, let's create another user. So this is the previous user I had. So we can copy the ID that the MongoDB will provide, right? And now what we can do, instead we can pass in here, and we can ask for this user, and there we go, 200. So we found the user. This is the Jean at test 1. So we can do another test just to show you. If I try to create this one again, it may already exist. So I will create one with the number 4th. And now we copy this ID again, come back here, and we're looking for the mail 4, right? Yeah, there we have it. So MongoDB is very easy to work with IDs, with finding objects. It's incredibly easy to use, and Mongoose makes our life much easier than normally it is. So now that we have everything working here, the next thing that we want to do is basically create a new module, right? So this is going to be a sport app, and this sport will have users and also will have events, right? So now what we want to do exactly is create a new module for the events. So we're going to say inside the modules, we're going to create a new file. This file will be called event, and this event will be, we can come back in the user. Basically, let's copy this, and here we're going to change a few things, right? The first thing, this will be an event instead of a user. So let's rename this to event schema. and the event will have a few properties. We'll have a title, it will have a description, it will have a price. This is quite interesting. This is not a string, so the price is a number, right? And it will have a thumbnail, right? And the thumbnail will be a string. And then you're thinking, why is going to be a string? Is because like in the database, we know we're not going to save the image, but what we're going to do here, we're going to save in here the URL of the image that we're going to receive and store inside of our app, right? So this will be the next thing that we're going to do. So let's work on that. This is a good start. It's not finished. We're going to come back here, add more things. We need to make a relational between the event and the company that will create the event, if that makes any sense. So we're going to come back to this, but let's start from the easiest parts of the app so that we can get on the app ready, right? So after doing that, we need to create a new controller, and the controller basically will be the events controller. Let me think. Yeah, that's going to be the event controller, right? So basically inside the event controller, inside the controllers, let's create the events controller. You guys can note that I'm trying to go a little bit quicker on this video, and the reason being, I think the first video was too long. I want to break this up in videos of half an hour, so that will be a little bit more digestible for you guys. So please remember to leave some few comments and give your feedback. That's very important. That's helped me with this series. So creating the event now will be basically another controller, right? So we can do a module.export and basically create an object and start all over again. So the first thing that we want to do is have a create event method that basically will be a sync create event. Will be a method like before. Let's put that a little bit down here. We're going to import a few things. First one will be a const. We will have here the event. So this event that we're importing here is the module, right? So will be equals to require from modules. Let's import the event, and then now we can use it to create a new event. Basically will be a request and a response. We will operate the same way that we did with the other methods to create. So the first thing that we need to look is for the body of the message. So I will say const, remember what we defined here. So we want to look for all these four things. I'll be putting this momentarily for here so that we know what we're doing. We don't waste this. Oops. What I mean by that was to doing that. So now we need a title, we need a description, we will need a price, and we will need a thumbnail. The thumbnail will be different. Thumbnail won't be passed here. Basically, will be equal to request dot body. So like we did before, we will have all this information coming from the other ones. I think something that we could also add is the date, right? We're missing the date in this event. Yes guys, so there's two things that we need to do. Basically we can add also a date. this is a type of date. And another thing that we can do here is add a user, because we want to make a relation between who did create that, right? So you need a user to create an event so that you can list the events. So this will be the type mongoose dot schema dot types dot object id, and and the reference will be the user. Oh, this is a type. That's how we do it. So now it makes sense. Types dot object id. Yeah. So basically what I'm doing here, just to show you and a little bit so that you can understand, I'm saying if you want to create an event, please, you need to provide a title, a description, a price, a thumbnail, string, a date, and a user, right? So which user have created that event? So this is something that we need to keep in mind so that we can literally make this connection, because when you have an event, we need to know, like, just the person who creates the event that's going to be able to delete the event, or to write, or to change the event, or to do something with the event, right? So that's basically what we want to do. So coming back for the event controller, another thing that we will need is the user ID again, right? So when you make a request to create something, we will need the user ID. So I can say const user, and well, let's start with the const user ID. But this will be a little bit different, because the request, because like imagine after you logged in, right? You're logged in, and this user, when you logged in, you have like your user ID that will be part of your session. So you need to send this to the server, so the server knows who are the user that wants to create an event, if that makes any sense. So then with the user ID, what we want to do is take it from the headers, right? Headers. And this is the headers of the message, right? As soon as I start to test, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. And then basically, so that this is a valid request, we want to look if this user actually exists. So user, so we'll need to import the user here as well. Const user, so require modules user. So basically we're going to wait a user dot find by ID. We will pass the user ID here, and then if that works, we're going to have a user, right? So if we do have a user, the first thing that we can do is a check. If user does not exist, we want to return basically a response with a status that will be 400, because like this is a bad request again, with the JSON and a message saying user does not exist. Does not. This needs to be a string. So basically this is fails if we don't have a user. That's the first scenario that we need to cover. The second thing that we need to do will be basically define an event. So the event will be basically event await event dot create, and we're going to pass an object with all the properties like we did previously to create a user. So here we're going to have a title, we're going to have a description, we're going to have a price, and there's we're going to have a user as well. And I've jumped that there. And the user, basically we will pass the user ID. So this user will make a relation to the event user that we defined it here, right? So basically we're saying we want a user inside of this object, and the user ID is what is used to make a relation with the right user. Let me think. I think that my works. There's something that we need to handle. That this is 3, 2, 1. This is going to work, but there's something else that we need to handle before we'll be able to test that, and that is the file, right? Because imagine, like I said, inside here we're going to have a thumbnail, and basically the thumbnail will be an image that we're going to send, right? But so that we can send this image, there's a few things that we need to do. So the first one, we need to define a file, right? Because we want to send this image to us. So a file needs to be, we can create a file using a file. I will call it a file name. I think like that. This will be required from rec.file, like so. And then, so this file name we can pass to the thumbnail, like so. Thumbnail will get a file name. So there's a few things that we need to do in order to make that happen. So we are saying that this module create event needs to receive all these informations from the request, right? So it'll be from the request.body, from the request.headers, and from the request.file. But there's a thing that we need to do using another library so that we can handle the file and make the file a little bit easier to work with. Once we have that, you guys, I'm gonna try to drive here, but you guys gonna understand what I mean by that. So let's just return here that I forgot. So here will be response.json again, and we're going to have the events, right? So basically what I normally do, we create a new event and then we send the event back. For us to be able to handle the file and pass a file name, there's a thing that we need to do. So coming back to the source, I want to create another folder, and this folder I'll call config, because we're going to create a file that basically holds a configuration in there. This initial file will be called upload, and this file will be a JavaScript file, right? And we're going to install another library that's going to help us to do that. Let me start the server, and this is going to be a Mootler. So Mootler is a library, a JavaScript library that helps us to handle file upload locally, and this is very cool and easy to use. So that's why I decided to go with Mootler. So here we can do const Mootler equals a require, and require Mootler there. And basically we also will need the path, because we're gonna handle the directory, so we need to remember that. So require and path. Okay, so now that we have both things defined, let's create module.export, and in here we're gonna create all the Mootler configuration that we need. So basically we're going to have a storage. This will be the object that is going to define where we're going to save, what's the file name, and all these things. So basically here you can use Mootler.disk storage, because we're going to save in disk, and this is takes an object. And then the first thing is the destination. Where do you want to save? Where do you want to save that? So we're going to use path here. If you never use path, path has this method resolve that basically will look for the dir name. So that means I'm going to pass a few directories here. So if you look, I'm inside the file that is inside configure, and inside I want to save the file in the root level, right? So basically what I need to do now is pass the path. So I want to return one directory, and then I want to return another directory, and then I want to create a folder that we'll call files, and I want to save there. So basically, I mean, remember that this file is inside upload. So if I do cd ... it will return for the past for the source level, and then you do ... again, you'll be in the root level inside a folder files that we're gonna use to create the files. So bear with me, this is sometimes it's complicated if you never did before, but like this is the same that if you were here is the same that you did that, right? This is would come back to the right place. So bear with me. And then the next thing that we need to pass for Mootler is the file name. And the file name basically requires us to do a few things, because I want to pass a callback so that we can pass the file name back to the controller, right? Remember that the controller requires a file name. So just so that you understand what I'm doing here. So inside the configuration again, the file name, we're going to create a function that will take a request, a file, and a callback. Callback is a callback function, right? And then here, a callback function, if you don't know what that means, sorry, that means do something with the file, with the function, and then after you finish, use the callback, right? Call the callback and resolve something for us. Then inside here, I want to do two things. I want to get the extension of the file, and this is again will be basically the extension name and the file.original file name. If you never came across that, this is basically an API in the browser, how you handle the files, right? So the browser the file has some properties inside, and we're using that API. And then we also want the name, that basically is the path.exact name, base name, and here will be file.original name, and we're going to pass the extension here. So we are creating basically a name for our file, and the name will be the original file name. Imagine that someone had the file called photo, and the extension will be JPG, perhaps JPEG or something like that, just to give you an example. After we do all these things, what we want to do now is a callback. If you have an error, right, you send the error here, but if you don't, basically what we want to do here, I will use a string interpolation so that we can basically use the name dot replace. This is a regex expression. So basically what this replace method does, it calls an expression. This is a regex expression to take out the space, and then we're going to return without a space a part of the string. And then here we want to carry on using the date dot now, because I want to every single file saved to be completely unique, and here the extension, right? So this is basically how we do. So I'm passing a name without space and taking a few things, and then dash date and dot extension, right? This should work because the extension take the original extension. So yeah, now that we have that, this is going to be our configuration. We're going to create the router, right? So let's format that. It's looking good. Basically, guys, this is all the code required. It's just a few lines of code to save and handle the files. And that's incredible, isn't it? Like, that's why I like so much JavaScript. So let's come back now for a route. So let's come back now for the route. Let's create the route, right? Let me put here, this is for a user. This is will be a little bit helpful for you. And this is will be for the event. Inside the event, there's this first event that we want to do is creating an event. So basically what we're going to do is a route for routes.post, this method to create, remember? And then here we want to create an event, so it'll be -event, and inside this event basically what we want to do is import our controller. So const event controller equals to require, and this is will be from the events controller. Oops, we need to remove that. Another thing that we want to import, we need to do basically two things here. So under the express, let's import multer again. This is will be required for what we're going to do, because we need to initiate this library, and basically we need to create now upload configuration. So let's do upload config. This is will be required from that file that we created, from the config file, upload here. And then now essentially what we're going to do is create a const uploader, that's fine, and the upload will be a multer instance of the upload config. So we're just making our life a little bit easier, if that makes any sense. So I like to keep on top modules. This is files that we created, and this is instances that we are creating. So that's how I like to organize my things. Feel free to follow it. If you like to have in a different format, that's also absolutely fine. Coming back to the router, basically now we can do the following, right? So we know that we want an event. So this is will be interested, right? Because we want to upload, like you can see here, I have a few things. You could upload an array of files, of fields, or a single file. In this case, I want to upload a single file, and I will pass the name of the field that I want, and that's thumbnail, right? That's what we created. And then after we do that, we basically just return the events controller dot create event, and the controller will be handling everything for us. So what this does, this is grab a file. Imagine a request that is coming from us, right? So we got a request, and the request hits the right URL, and before the request went to the controller, it has a middleman here, that basically a middleware that will grab the file from the request. It will create a folder called files in here. It will save the file inside the folder. It will pass as a callback the thumbnail property to this create event here. So that's exactly how that's going to work for us. So now let me think. if we are missing anything. No, I think we are good to have a try and test this. Yeah, I think so. I think it's gonna be enough for now. So basically, to test this, we're going to create now a new folder, and this folder will be an events folder. So here, guys, now we need to create a new request inside the event, and will be a create event request. Remember, this is a post request, but this is a little bit different from the past request. So this will be a multi-part form request, and the first thing that we want to send is a title, and the title, the value of the title will be this is my first event. Then we want to pass a description, and description will be, do you like running? So the third thing we need to pass is a price, right? So this will cost us £30. Apart from this, we also can send a file. So, and for this example, let me grab on my desktop that MERN photograph, and I can add a name for that. I don't need to add, but that's fine. The next thing that we need to do in the header, we need to pass the user ID, and that's we can grab again from this request, so we can borrow from there, right? Now that we have a completed request with price, description, title, and a photograph, let's try this out, right? So this is going to be for the URL, and this is going to be for the URL/event. So if we send this post request, we need to start our server. So now the server is working. If you look here, interesting fact, it created files folder already, just because I started the server. So that means we're good to go. Now if I send this request, I have a problem. Let's see what's wrong. Unexpected field. Okay, I see, guys. The problem that we have is because we didn't pass a thumbnail. If you look in the router, we are saying that the file will be uploaded under a thumbnail name. So that's why it didn't work. So now if we send that again, user does not exist. Hold on, there's a few things that we need to check. First, if you look the picture, it was created inside the MERN Stack and followed exactly the name convention that we expected it to work, but it indeed returned an error instead of a response. So let's investigate that a little bit more, right? So if you look the header again, let's look the user control. Let's close this. Let's close the event. Let's close this. So let's inspect this together. So if you look the user ID, it's awaiting that from the header, right? So if we do a const dot, if we do a console log dot rec dot headers, and we send this request again, we can see that we have a few things inside here. One of the things is the user ID. So that is the problem, right? So I can see that the header is having the user ID. So because it's not accepting the camel case here. So let me see if I can change this to user ID instead, because this is a header request. So they have this different what they accept and also what they do not accept. So user ID will be valid now. So this is like, I'm gonna leave this in so that you guys see how we debug stuff, right? So user ID, that works. Okay. Validation, field price, cast to number, failed for value. Okay, that's interesting. So the user ID was working, right? So what happens here is like, so that I can show you, it's basically saying that the price is a number, and that's not a number that we're sending here. So what we can do in this case, we can basically parse this to a float. This is converts the string for a number, and then we can have price inside, right? And then now you can see like I have 4 photographs here already, because all the times it did work the upload. So now let's try this again for the final time. Probably now it's gonna be fine. Yeah, there you have it. So see guys how that works. So now basically we have a request that it was created an ID. You can see that they attached the user ID inside the way we planned it. It added the price, it converted to a number, it added the message, and it created and here we have the URL, right, of the picture that we have. Actually, it's not the URL yet, but we're gonna create the URL now. So we have the file name, right, and that's exactly what we want. So MongoDB has a thing that I think is amazing. So you can create a virtual properties as well. And that means I have a property that I don't want to duplicate, but I want to store another difference, like a URL for this. So there's a few things that we need to do. We're going to start changing now this server, right? Because in order for us to be able to host the files, so now imagine that we have the files being stored inside the files folder. However, if you go, let me open the browser. If you go for localhost 8000, this is our MongoDB. If you go to status, just to show you, status 200, right? But however, if you go for files, this won't work. And the reason that it's not going to work is because Express wasn't told to host that files. So that's exactly what we're going to do next. So basically, we can go here and say app.use, and then basically we want to host the files folder, and basically we need to do express.static, because there will be a static folders, and then we can use path.resolve. We need to import path again, like we did in the another one. Const path equal require path, and let's copy from here. And then remember that we did that here. So basically what we want to do is the same thing here, but is one less. It's one less than that. So we're going to do path.resolve. This will be one less, and files, right? Because we are here, if we come back one, and we have the files. So that's enough for us. Now if you come back here and see what I'm doing, the files now folder exists, and the way I know is because this is slash. But what we can do to test that is basically copy that URL that we had. So what happens now if I had this dash that? See? So now we are serving the image that we told MongoDB that we have the name on MongoDB and our server have the image inside the folder. So the next thing that we need to do, and that's quite nice, we can create a virtual property, right? And to do that, the first thing that we need to do is go back again to our files. Let's go for our model. Inside event, there's a few things that we need to do. When you create a schema, you pass an object with everything that you want inside, and this is what's going to be saved inside MongoDB. However, you can pass here another options, as you can see, schema definition and options, and means this is an optional, this is not required, but if you want to do, you do. So in our case, for this particular thing, we need to pass another property here, and then here we have to JSON. This is a conversion that we're going to do, and inside we have a virtuals, right? And this is basically we saying to MongoDB, do you know that functionality virtuals that you can handle? We want to use that, so please turn that on, right? So you don't need to think that much around this. This is all explained in the MongoDB docs. So if you want to read a little bit more the docs, I do recommend you to have a look. But now inside here is interesting because the event schema has a virtual property, and this virtual means we want to create a virtual property, and this is going to be a thumbnail URL, and what we want to pass as a value is there is a get method here, and basically you can pass a function here, and this is going to return, we can do in one line actually. So this will return a string, right? And the string will have for now, let me think, let's pass a localhost for now. So I can copy this. This is what we're gonna use now, but we're gonna change that in the future. This is just to show you. And then of course here I have inside the schema already the property, so I can make a reference to here using the this keyword. So this is going to bring me all the properties that I have, and then inside I have a thumbnail already. So that this is basically will return to us a property with the link already, so that we can use in the front end. So if we created another request so that we can test, let me change it. This is going to be the second event, and I'll leave the same. I'll just change the price and the same picture. If you send that request, there you go. Now you have everything saved. This is the second event. We have a thumbnail name, but we also have a virtual property. And bear in mind, virtual property is something that does not exist inside the MongoDB. It's just a virtual that the server is handling that for us. So if you click here, oh, the name is coming undefined. I probably have a typo there. Let me have a look. Oh, I see. This is return undefined because here should be a function. This is to do with objects. So basically, when you have an object inside, when you have a function inside an object declaration, you cannot use the this keyword, because an arrow function has the arrow that basically has a different scope. So now we can return this. Now that this will make reference to the event, and previously it wasn't because the arrow function. So if we created a third time, that should be fine now. This is my third event. Yeah, there you have it. Now it did work, and that's what we expected to be doing. Guys, now that we have this is working, the final bit that I want to do today is the second method to get the event by ID, right? So remember that previously we did the same with user. So basically now what we want to do is basically, let me copy that, a get request, and then the difference that's going to be will be an event ID, and here we don't need this anymore, and basically we're going to pass get event by ID that we're going to create, right? So if you go inside the controller, let's add the second method. So, and this is basically the same thing that we did before. So if you have an async method, that will be get event by ID. This is, will have a rec and res params. Oops. And then we basically can do, we can copy a little bit this. So basically what we want here is to get const, this is going to be event ID, and this is will come from the params. See, Frank is snoring quite a lot now. Sorry guys. So you can get the request.params from the events ID, and then basically what we're going to do here is const event, and this is will be await and use it. This is will be event dot find by ID and event ID, right? And then the event ID, if you have an event ID, so that's what I wanted to copy. So I think these will be, if you have an event, let's return the event. This is will be basically the event, right? That should be basically what we're doing there. And let's wrap this on the try and catch, because we could have an error here if you don't have the ID. And if you have an error, we can basically do here event ID does not exist, right? So let's test this now. Yeah, let's test this now. I think we can do this check before, right? If you don't have an event ID, well, let's leave like that for now. Right, so the second method we want to create here is get event by ID. This is will be a get request. Let's copy the URL from here. Basically it's the same endpoint, and let's copy this ID, right? So now if you go in the request and you pass an ID of the event and send the request, there you have it. It found the event with that ID. This is the third event, and there you have it. So guys, I hope that you are having fun and that you are enjoying this series and that you're learning a lot of Express. This will be a hard to digest series, because I'm going to go all over the place. I'm going to teach you all the things about Express, and then we're going to start with React. We're going to build the app to use all this API that we are creating. So I hope that you are having fun, and hopefully I'm gonna see you in the next video. So don't forget please to leave your like and support this video. This is very important for me, for the work that I'm doing here, and to share this video with all your friends. So thanks very much, you guys. I really appreciate your support, and take care.